In this In the Loop, I want to talk about the updated changes to the Franchise Code of Conduct. So with me today, we have Chris Burling from our legal team. So Chris, what's the background to these changes? Why do we even have these updated rules?
Yeah, so the Franchising Code of Conduct was always due to sunset in April 2025. So the government organised an independent review. From the review, they've incorporated some of the suggested amendments to the code with a view to increasing compliance and transparency across the industry.
Okay, and so these changes come into play 1 April 2025, do they?
For the most part, so the majority comes into effect April, and there's some transitional provisions that come into effect in November.
And so pretty much every franchise needs to update their existing and new agreements, do they?
Absolutely. So basically every franchisor has to update their template documentation. So franchise agreements entered into after the 1st of April, the new provisions will apply.
And what about if you've got an existing agreement? Do they need to get updated or anything?
No, they'll remain as is, but it will be critical if they have renewal terms, that those renewal terms are on the updated provisions.
So Chris, I understand one of the changes is around the franchisors having to assess the viability of the franchise that they're about to issue. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so franchisors now have an obligation to only grant new franchises where there's a reasonable opportunity for the franchisee to make a return on their investment.
And do we know what reasonable means in the terms of the code?
So that's up to judicial interpretation in the future, but a lot of people are taking that as a requirement to grant longer terms for the franchise.
So they get their payback period longer.
Exactly, but it's obviously a difficult way to assess, because whether reasonable return is just on the initial investment of opening the franchise or whether it's profitability over the long term.
Is that going to be more work for accountants to sort of help franchises sort of present and assess the viability?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously accounting is an important part of a new franchise, assessing the model and whether it's going to be viable, but also signing off on the advice certificates at the first step. So not all franchisors require that franchisees get advice. They can actually sign a waiver, but we recommend franchisors definitely enforce that as a requirement.
And I understand some of their obligations, like they don't have to provide as many documents in some situations now as well?
Yeah, so the disclosure document is generally the largest document a franchisee will receive when they're being granted a franchise. So one of the recent amendments was that to reduce the information overload to a franchisee was to give a key fact sheet, which is just a summary of the disclosure. So that has not lasted very long, because apparently giving more documents is not simple.
So you don't have to do the simplified sort of fact sheet now? No,
so that's been done away with now, which I think most people are pretty happy with.
Okay. Any other key changes from the updated code?
A lot of increases to penalties. So, for example, like the obligation to act in good faith, which has always been embodied in the code, is a breach of that is 600 penalty units now, which is substantially more than it previously was. Essentially greater financial penalties for non-compliance.
So the key thing I'm hearing is, if I'm a franchisor, I need to get my agreements updated and I need to get cracking if it's 1 April.
Yeah, absolutely. Compliance is key because the consequences are very significant.
Okay, thank you, Chris. If anyone would like any more information about the updated changes to the Franchise Code of Conduct, you can of course reach out to Chris and our broader legal team here at Business Depot. And if you'd like to stay in the loop with all the things happening in the business world, you can do so by subscribing below. You can follow us on LinkedIn or check out the website at businessdepot.com.au.